Hello everyone, welcome back to your aggressive e4 repertoire. Today we're going to look at the Sicilian. Last time we looked at e4, e5, but today we're going to look at the most popular move with black, c5. Also the best move to try and play for a win with black. So here, there are obviously a lot of options. I will make a video about a3, you can play some gambits which are aggressive. The Alapin is kind of aggressive. But what I actually recommend against the Najdorf specifically, the open Sicilian just. Most players are going to be very prepared against this when I play the Najdorf, like this. This initiates the Najdorf. But what they maybe don't know is rook to g1, which is called the freak attack. I don't know how these openings get their names, but it's called the freak attack for some reason. So there are a couple of options here. You can play knight c6, there's b5, g6 has been played by, for example, Ali Reza Farouja against Jordan van Forest in Tata Steel, and also e5 can be played. So first we're going to look at knight to c6. Here you're just going to play g4, which is basically the main idea in this opening. Because the knight is on f6, you can go g5 to kick it away. And then, let's say the knight moves. Let's just make something up. Let's say the knight moves, so basically the idea is to go h4, f4, and then maybe f5, and then g6 to attack the castle king, or just to attack the king side in general. So after g4, there are again a couple of options. So what you might be thinking, since this pawn is only protected by the rook and the queen, what if he just takes here, queen takes, and now bishop takes g4. Now against bishop takes g4, you can actually just sack the rook. A brilliant move, because after knight takes g4, there's simply, queen to a4 check. And after something like queen d7, which is forced, now the brilliant move, bishop to b5, which wins the queen basically. So black is forced to take, and now just queen takes a8 and queen d8, and now you can just take on b7. And if you count the materials equal, yes, but this pawn is falling. This knight kind of stands stupidly here. In the game he tried b4, and now just simply knight to d5, which threatens this and threatens the pawn. In the game queen d7 was played, and yeah, this is just completely winning. Yeah, this is just obviously completely winning. So let's look at another line. After queen takes c4, not bishop takes g4, which you saw was losing, but knight takes g4. Maybe this changes something. You don't actually sacrifice the rook here because the bishop stays on the board. So example, after rook takes, the queen doesn't have to block. The bishop can just block. Now this obviously doesn't work anymore. So yeah, knight d5 here's the move, which was very active. Knight can go to b6. And here there are again a few options, like knight takes h2, which is not that good of a move. Just bishop to e2. Just a line. The knight is trapped here, and you're gonna get the knight. So if they instead knight take e2, they try bishop to d7. This fork doesn't really do much because you don't win any material back, which is vital at this point. But bishop to g5, which looks completely insane. Like, what does that even do? But it provokes f6. And after f6, you don't actually have some tactical resource to win the game, but you just go bishop to d2 back. And now you're trying to go in here and do something on the dark squares here. I mean, not immediately, obviously, but at some point, h5 is kind of the best move here. Not just h3, and something like knight to e5. Now rook to g3, which is again an insane move. But the idea is kind of simple actually. You're just trying to get to b3. Or to c3. c3 wouldn't be as good. c3 would only be good if the bishop was already out. Let's say, for example, like this. But yeah, rook to c8. And now you simply kick the knight. And here, you're just better. And this should be an easy game. And the moves are quite natural in these positions. The king is weak and it's kind of stuck here, actually. And, I mean, this knight is going to be terrible. Like, it's going to have to go to f7 or c6. But it's just going to be bad. Well, you have these great pieces, this great queen, this great rook. This bishop is going to be good via this diagonal. This knight is amazing. And e6 can't really be played because it just softens up the king too much. And you're just going to castle and you're just going to have a great life. Now if they try bishop to e6, if you looked at bishop to d7, but now bishop to e6, what do you even do here? You go knight to b6. And it attacks the rook. And now rook to b8, and now actually queen to a4 check. The bishop has to block, and now you actually take with the queen here. Queen takes, knight takes, king takes, and now rook takes g4, and you're obviously just completely winning your upper piece. your pieces are active, and this is just way better. It's actually kind of a trap line that you can think of in these positions. If bishop to e6, you win by force after rook to b8, and you know, this whole sequence that I just showed you, which is kind of also what makes this opening so good. You have traps in this opening. Like, I'm not going to show you every single trap. I'm just going to show you the main ideas and some of the main lines. But if you really look deep into the opening, there are a lot of traps here. So let's look at another try by black, and that is not knight takes g4, which we've looked at the entire time, but h6 here. h6 is basically saying he's trying to prevent g5, which is kind of a good idea, but I can just play g5 anyways. If he takes, now bishop takes g5, and if he tries to take here with the rook, now simply take, and knight to d5. This knight to d5 idea, you know, we've seen it a couple of times by now. This is kind of thematic. But now you just castle along, and here you're pawn down, but your bishop is active, your queen is like this queen is worth at least 10 points or 11. This is such a good queen, while this queen is not really doing anything, can't really develop anywhere. This rook is on h2, looking kind of active, but it's not really doing anything at the end of the day. Well, this rook has an open file. This rook, I guess, could be good, but white's pieces are just way more active. The king is safer. This king could actually get in a lot of trouble, because since you've moved this rook, you can't castle kingside, obviously. And castling queenside would lead to a lot of trouble, since the dark squares are very weak here, you know, sacks and a6 and stuff. Yeah, so this is just way better for white, in my opinion. So let's look at another option that white has in this line, which comes after all of this. g6 here. So I mentioned this earlier. This was what Alireza Firouzja played. I'm actually gonna follow a few moves out of their game. Here, Joran van Forest played with white, and he played g4. You know, it doesn't really matter what black does. If it's g6, knight c6, you're just gonna play g4 anyway. So you can kind of think about that, or take that to the bank. Knight to c6 went the game, and now g5, knight to d7. You can already see here, this pawn is very strong. It restricts black's position, and this knight is gonna have a hard time finding a good home. I mean, I guess e5, but then just f4. So here, Joran played h4, just supports the pawn, and maybe even tries to play h5 immediately, but maybe not immediately, but it's at some time. And now knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and now knight to e5. So Alireza tried. And now actually, because this is threatened, the best move in this position is not bishop to g2 or moving the queen, but in this position, Joran van Forest, actually in the game, he played king to d1. It's an insane looking move. King to d1 is like straight out of a 500 game. It looks like it makes no sense. But actually, if you think about it, this knight is pinned. It can't go anywhere, because then rook is hanging, and this knight is here, just going to be trapped after bishop g2. So actually, white is just completely winning, because this king is not safe at all, and this king can kind of become safe with the bishops guarding and then going to c1. And, you know, first you think that's a stupid move, but when you look at it more, you really think, that makes so much sense. So here, Alireza played rook to g8, and now black can castle here again. And every queenside castle in these positions is just going to be way too risky. Now knight to d5, still completely ignoring this fork. But now queen to c3, not a check, but queen to c3. This is actually where the opening gets hard, because you have to know these moves. You have to know the theory up until this point. You have to know queen to e3. But the idea is, I mean, you could fight it during the game. The idea is white natural. It's just that if white takes here, you have this fork, and now the king is not safe at all. And white actually doesn't have a better choice than to take the rook, because because you're attacking the knight. If you can't move the knight, obviously you can't take here, because then you're just going to lose a rook. So the best try here, the engine just says the best try is to take and to give this, and you're just completely winning. I mean, Stockfish says plus 1.5, but from a human perspective, it's completely winning. It's completely lost for black. Black has no chance of coming back. It's a 2-result game for white. So we've looked at knight to f3, but if bishop to g7, which Alireza played actually, yeah, and now just queen to b6, and now queen takes, knight takes, and now you just take here. And this is, I mean, after c3, this is technically equal, it's plus 0.2 on a lower depth. Maybe on higher depth it's going to be different. But at the end of the day, white's king is going to get into the game. White has the bishop pair. White has more space. White has an active rook. White is going to have 2 active rooks. And I mean, if you didn't know the evaluation of this position, then you might as well think that white is better here. I mean, I would think so, that white is better here. If I was playing white, I would definitely play for a win, because this definitely seems winning. I mean, the engine can obviously hold this, but as a human, it's going to be very hard for black. Now let's actually look at another line in this opening right here after rook g1 h6. We don't have to pay too much attention to this. It is a line that could be played, obviously, but it's not very strong. It's not very natural, so it's probably not going to be played a lot. So you just have to know the idea that you go g4 here anyways. Like I said, you basically always go g4, and after e5, now you go knight to b3, with the idea of maybe going to d2, bishop to e6, bishop to d2, queen to d7, and now just h3, d5, ed5, knight to d5, and now bishop to g2. And you just have to know the setup, like with the bishop and the 2 knights here. And here it can really go anyways in these games, but knight c6 is the top engine move, and now just knight takes, bishop takes, queen takes, and now bishop to c3 is a draw line, if I believe, but queen to e2 kind of still tries for the advantage. Bishop to e7, long castles, queen to e6, because this was threatened. But yeah, queen to e6, and now just king to b1, and this is very equal. And again, I'm not sure who's winning this. Maybe nobody's winning this. It's probably going to be a draw. This is kind of one of the only draw lines in this opening. But I mean, you definitely still have winning potential. I mean, this pawn could be weak. Maybe if you play g5 and traded something off here, you could get piece activity, definitely. I mean, it's not a guaranteed draw. So yeah, now we actually come to one of the better lines in this opening for black, which is this line e5. Now also, this is kind of, you just have to know the setup and the ideas. You go knight to b3. Basically, whenever he plays e5, even if you have the pawn on g4, knight f5 looks so good. No, you always go knight to b3, bishop to e6, g4, d5, and I just take, knight takes, queen takes, bishop e3, knight c6, castles, bishop d6, bishop b6, and a rook to d6. And again, this is kind of drawish. But I mean, you have the 3-on-2 here, and this pawn is questionable. Maybe g5 could be played, and then this pawn could be trying to attack. Definitely, both sides have winning chances. Black definitely with the majority here. White with the majority here. And you can go both ways. If you manage to double these pawns, like let's say this pawn was here, it would be probably better for black, because then he would only have the only majority really, because this doesn't really count. But yeah, this is again a bit drawish, but it's fine. Both sides could win. Now let's look at arguably the best try for black here in this opening, which is b5. Here I missed it. b5 here, which is b5 here. And here again, g4. This is just the idea every time. It doesn't matter what black plays, you always go g4. Bishop to b7 attacks the pawn. And now you could play f3, but just bishop to g2, developing, defending. Knight f to d7 is the best move because it anticipates g5. Now g5 doesn't really do that much. So bishop to e3, just developing. And now you're kind of just playing a normal Sicilian, but for some reason you have these 3 pieces here. But this line I actually really like, because now you go f4. And this is really dynamic. If they try something like queen h4 check, thinking, oh, I'm gonna win your pawn. No, bishop to f2. And this is actually kind of bad after queen to f3. Because, as you can see, this queen has basically no move. Not immediately. You don't try to trap it immediately. g5 here. tries to get out, and now knight c to e2. Here defending here again. Now g f4, and now just rook to h1, just simply, and now knight to e5 has to be played, and now actually you can just take. Knight takes, bishop takes, and if you count the material, you have a piece for 2 pawns. This pawn is extremely weak. You have active pieces, you're just winning this. Now after queen here, what if, so we just looked at queen to h4, which we just discussed as a blunder. So bishop to e7 is the best try. And now g5. And white is a bit better here. It's just the space advantage and more active pieces. But black can definitely fight back with b4 here. Knight c to e2. And now what is the most common move here, e5, is a total blunder. Because knight to f5. You always have to remember this idea. I just told you that if e5 you always have to go to b3. But that was only when knight f5 could just be met by g3. Because now knight to f5 attacks something, so it comes with a tempo. But actually g6 is still here the best move. Because it's just so losing. You would just take here, and yeah, life is good. a5, obviously just completely winning. This king is completely weak, can't castle. Even if it could, just run into an insane attack. So that was the opening basically. If you want to place, then go ahead. But as I said, proceed with caution. Because this is a very hard opening to play. You have to really know your stuff. Because if you don't, you're going to get crushed. So yeah, that was the second episode of my e4 series for white. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I'll see you next time against the other Sicilian variations. Goodbye.